Hans is a member of our Community Alliance Board. He was born in Berlin, in Germany, in April 14th, 1928, and his parents' names were Ernst and Henny Angress. He had two older brothers, Tom and Fred, and his family was, he describes, as a typical upper-middle-class German-Jewish family. His father was a banker and his mother was a homemaker. I like to think of Hans as an example of, he's going to get embarrassed, but I'm going to say it anyway. He is an example of what the human spirit can be.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman, for this more than kind introduction. Good afternoon. The reason why I like to share my experience growing up during the Nazi years in Germany and Holland is to basically emphasize how thin a veneer our civilization really is, how easy it was for, for Hitler, whom I basically considered a nutcase, but unfortunately with a very high IQ, to be able to influence so many basically decent people to start doing terrible things. And it's really scary that he was able to do that. Another reason why I like to talk to groups, especially to young people, is that I promised my oldest brother on his deathbed that I would continue to work toward a more peaceful world, to try to help people understand that we are living on one planet, we have to share this planet, and we have to tolerate each other. We don't have to love each other, but let's quit killing each other. This said, I will share with you what it was like to grow up during that period. My first experience this was my first day of school, and the cone that I'm holding is full of candy to signify a sweet year ahead. Well, it didn't turn out that way. I was in a regular German public school, only boys. There were 52 boys in my class, and I was the only Jewish kid. So, and this was in 1934, 1 year after Hitler came to power. And already I was placed in the back of the class, a little bit separate, as if I had a contagious disease. And the other kids weren't ugly to me. They didn't call me dirty Jew, they didn't spit in my face, but they wouldn't interact with me. What probably has happened is that, again, keep in mind that it was only 1 year after Hitler came to power, and the Nazi government made it very clear that it was unpatriotic to accommodate Jews. So the parents told their kids probably, stay away from that Angress kid. I have reason to believe that the majority of the parents of those kids were not Nazis. Nevertheless, they would not interact with me. And it made me uncomfortable. For instance, in the morning we had the assembly around the flagpole, and first they hoisted the German red, white, and blue flag and sang the German national anthem, and then they hoisted the swastika, and sang the Horst Wessel Lied, the Nazi anthem, and all the kids stood there all the while making this Nazi salute, and I, being Jewish, was not allowed to do that. Not that I wanted to do it, but I certainly stuck out like a sore thumb. So it was an uncomfortable year for me in that school. The teacher treated me all right. I got halfway decent grades, I think. We lived at the time on a busy street leading out to the suburbs. And so on Sunday mornings, if I remember correctly, we lived in this apartment here, and my father's desk was in front of here. And my brother Fred and I, on Sunday mornings, like to sit there and chew on some stale bread and watch what's going on down below. And there came, you know, streetcars and buses and bikes and autos, but also the SR, the German Nazi troops, came marching down the street singing, "Wenn das Judenblut vom Messer spritzt, dann geht's noch mal so gut. When the Jewish blood squirts off the knife, things go twice as well." Well, you can imagine that that ditty didn't particularly make me cheerful. And I went to my parents and asked them, what do these guys want? And they said, well, you know, that's really their problem. That's not your problem. Don't worry about it. Well, ultimately, it certainly turned out to be my problem. When we moved from here, my parents enrolled me in a Jewish school, and that settled the school problem for me. The rest of the time in Germany, we didn't have to wear the star yet, and by and large, you certainly knew that you were living in a hostile environment, but we still had a fairly normal childhood. And on Sundays we had a canoe and went out canoeing, and but for instance, in the parks, they installed yellow benches for the Jews, and non-Jews were supposed to sit on the green benches. Well, no, I never saw anybody sit on the yellow benches. In 1937, my father decided all of a sudden, he read the newspaper, and he said, we cannot stay in Germany anymore. He was not allowed to be banker anymore, and that was all he knew. And well, let me backtrack for a minute. At the Jewish school that I went to, in 1936 we had a mini Olympics. All the Jewish schools, my brother participated, and he got in for his class, for his age group, first class in high jump and second for 100-meter dash, and this was me. I was not able to participate. I was too young, but I was allowed to carry this sign for the school. Keep this photo in mind, it will come back later on. So in 1937, my parents decided to leave Germany, and we initially went from Berlin by train through Holland, then over to England and ended up in London. We had a visitor's visa for London. We could stay there for 4 months. When we left Germany, my father took his hard-earned money along. Jews were encouraged to leave Germany, but there was a tax that you had to pay, which amounted about 2/3 of your assets. And my father had the responsibility of a family of 5, and he said, no way I'm going to leave that money behind. So he paid a young lady to smuggle the money, his money, from Germany to Holland. She had a suitcase with a double button, and she managed to get it across all right. She probably got about 10% of what she smuggled. once we were in London, we tried to get to the United States or to South America. We made all kinds of attempts, and nothing really worked. My father, we could have gone to Brazil, but you had to, in those days, you had to become a Catholic in order to get to Brazil. And my father absolutely refused. My mother said, 3 drops of water, what do you care? But my father wouldn't budge. Ultimately, Holland was one of the few countries that still would accept German Jewish refugees. So back to Holland we went, and we settled in Amsterdam, where my parents started a new business, a lingerie store, women's clothes, and which was very successful. And we started a year later a second store in the city of Rotterdam, and a third store was planned, which my brother Fred was supposed to manage, but that never happened. I had 2 very, very nice years in Holland. It were actually during my conscious years, my only 2 normal years, where I joined the Cub Scouts first and the Boy Scouts, and I had friends in the school, and it was a normal life. It was I felt comfortable among the Dutch. And here, this was our class outing to the zoo, and here you see me and my girlfriend Hedda at the time. This was 5th grade. The guy that made this show decided to blow it up. Who put the PowerPoint together, and this is us in 1993. So the years in Holland were really wonderful until the Nazis invaded Holland. And things started changing rapidly. I was supposed to enter high school. In Holland, elementary school is 6 years, and then you go on to high school. And I had already taken the entrance exam and to go to a regular Dutch high school, and then we were required to go to a Jewish school. So I ended up in the this was, well, I must have skipped one. Sorry. I ended up in a Jewish school with 23 students in my class. And once you, in Holland at the time, once you have selected your direction you want to go in, whether it's more mathematical or more classical or more languages, you stay with that group all the way through high school. So you don't pick and choose classes. And so we enrolled in that school. In the meantime, my brother Tom, my oldest brother, I will backtrack a little bit. He grew up, he's 8 years older than I was, and he experienced Germany 13 years before Hitler. And he belonged to a he entered a Jewish group called the Schwarze Fähnlein, which was a sort of an answer to the Hitler Youth, a Jewish answer to the Hitler Youth. And I want to read you one part of his book of how the young Jewish people felt at the time. When he joined that group, of prime importance was the fact that my new friends shared with me the idea that we were first and foremost Germans, whose religious faith happened to be by chance Jewish. As we then saw it, Germany was our fatherland and would remain our fatherland. For here not only we were born, but also our parents and their parents and so forth. Naive as we were then, we firmly believed that all we had to do was to prove to the new German government that in all our being, our thinking, and our actions, we were German and would remain German. In consequence, we would then be accepted into the broad front of German renewal. Well, obviously that didn't happen. I just wanted to point out the conflicts that my brother was. He was trained, while I was going to school in Germany still, he was trained to become a farmer because it was obvious that German kids had no future in Germany. And with farming, they figured you could live anywhere in the world. So when we went to Holland, he managed with a group of other kids that were trained the same way to get to the United States. Others managed to get to South America, Kenya. They're scattered all over the world, but they were a tight bunch. So when the Hitler period came, he was fortunately in Virginia on a farm. I'll get back to him later on. So I entered the school, and as Dr. Goodman said, I entered at the same time as Margot Frank, but she was on a different track than I was. Our classrooms, actually, and I'm missing one slide in here, of the school that we attended, were adjacent to each other. So I saw her regularly, but I can't really say that I knew her. I know we played volleyball, we had intramural sports. It's the only kind of recreational activity we had. We could not swim, we could not do any particular, outside of school we couldn't do anything in the line of recreation. In 1941, Hitler, a lot of things happened. One thing was that my father was arrested because he was deemed to be a criminal because he caught taking his money along. And the German police caught up with him in Holland, and he went to jail. First in Holland and then in Berlin. Also in 1941, we were required to wear this gem, which made it very clear on the street that I was a Jew, and some people tried to tell me to be proud of it. Quite frankly, I saw it more of a target. And the third thing that happened is that initially Hitler just tried to make it uncomfortable for the Jews or impossible for Jews to earn a living in Germany and tried to make them leave the country. And that's actually how half the German Jewish population survived. They left before the war broke out. Once the war broke out, that wasn't possible anymore. The borders were closed. And that in the fall of 1941 is when Hitler decided to, he basically ordered the final solution of the Jewish problem. That is to basically kill all the 11 million Jews living in Europe, not only in the countries that he controlled, but he planned to also conquer England and Turkey and Switzerland and Sweden and all the other countries that he did not manage to get. Of the 11 million targeted, he only succeeded to kill 6 million, so a little bit more than half, even though all told, they killed 11 million people in the concentration camps, including gay people, people with disabilities, gypsies, which we now call Romas, Jehovah's Witnesses, because they refused to pledge allegiance to Hitler, and so on. And that resulted in early 1942 that a conference was held in Wannsee to carry out his mandate for the final solution. And I visited this place, the Wannsee Villa, where these 15 people gathered to figure out now how we are going to do that. I mean, to kill 11 million people is a big task. I must say that 8 of these people are doctors or have PhDs, the remainder are high military officers. And that goes to show that evil, intelligent people are a heck of a lot more dangerous than less intelligent ones. The less intelligent ones are merely obnoxious. These guys are deadly. And this is now what they call a Mahnstelle, a sort of museum where many students in Germany come and visit, and they have all kinds of exhibits there. And one of the exhibits is what Berlin Jewish life was before the war. And lo and behold, I found my picture blown up there. They didn't know who it was, and I didn't know when I came in there that I would find it there. So it really blew my mind to find this picture in that horrible place in the Wannsee Villa. Oh, here's my school. It's out of, this was my classroom, and I think this was Anne Frank's. Yeah, I usually refer to the 15 men that were assembled there as sort of the board of directors of Clark Pest Control. Only they had other things in mind. And 6 months after we started school, the Nazis started implementing the final solution. The first thing was that about 2,000 young people, usually between the age of 18 and 23, got a call to report for work in Germany. Well, this is a book written about our school, and this is a class list, and here's my name for the first grade and the second grade, and here's Anne Frank's grade. I just put that in there to prove that I'm not just blowing hot air, but that I actually, that I actually went to school with the bread. And this was a call that 2,000 young people got, including my brother Fred, and 2 young women that lived with us at the time, and also the older sister of Anne Frank, Margot Frank. And this is when the Frank family went into hiding. My mother immediately said that my brother wasn't going to go, and she managed to get a job for him with the Jewish Council. Now, the Jewish Council was an agency mandated by the Nazis to be sort of an intermediary between the SS and the German leadership and the Jewish people as a whole. So all their mandates came through the Jewish Council and the Jewish newspaper and was distributed to the Jewish population, because the Nazis did not want to get that stuff through the regular newspaper, because they didn't want to alienate any more than they already have, the Dutch population. And here's a whole list of stuff that people were supposed to bring. And the 2 young women that lived with us, Hilde and Lotte, decided to go. Hilde had just married a few months before, and she said, oh, it won't be so bad. And they took along tennis rackets and sunglasses for recreation after work. My mother strongly advised them against going, but they were adults, and my mother had no authority over them. So they left. And my brother started his work at the Jewish Council. Hi there, Mom. My mother was bound and determined to survive. For instance, there was a law that Jews had to have always a backpack ready to go. And my mother decided we are not even going to buy backpacks. Because psychologically, once you buy a backpack, you are already half a step to actually going. And she also told my brother and me, you know, if the Nazis ever get a hold of you, run at the first occasion that you see. She said, the worst that can happen to you is that they shoot you. And believe me, that is a lot better than what you're going to find at the end of the train ride they want to put you on. So unfortunately, my mother was one of the few people that was realistic about what the Nazis were capable of doing. And yeah, again, I have very mixed feelings about my mother. She was really not a warm, fuzzy mother. My father was much more warmer and fuzzier. But guess who survived? I mean, she was a tough one. And this, my brother's job, gave us this stamp in our ID, and that said basically, until further notice, you are exempt from work in Germany. And not only did she get that, did my brother get that, but also my mother and me. And in our ID also, you know, every Jew had to have the J stamped in it, and if you were caught on street and had an ID with a J in it and you weren't wearing your star, you were a goner automatically. Four months after the people had reported for work in Germany, thank you, death notices started arriving. And for every last one of them, and that should have been a wake-up call. 800 people had responded, 800 death notices came, and that, to the best of my knowledge, was the only time that the Nazis ever sent death notices. And the death was here, it states heart attack. Well, you know, somebody had to fill in the cause of death, and somebody was sitting there, and I guess it was either heart attack or stroke for all these young people. My brother's job in the meantime with the Jewish Council was to go along with the SS at night to pick up his fellow Jewish people, and initially help carry luggage or babies or support elderly people. And later on, when it became obvious that it didn't make much sense to every night run a train to the camp Westerbork, which was the first stop to the concentration camps, they had transformed a theater in Amsterdam, a Jewish theater, into a holding facility. And so he worked in that holding facility to help people with their daily needs. And the kids under 13 were placed across the street from the holding facility to a nursery place where they were taken care of because they were too much of a distraction in this one big room of the theater. And so a bunch of the, about 6 or 8 of the Jewish people who worked there decided to help as many people to escape as possible. And so the leader of that group was a Walter Süskind. And so my brother worked with him and with some others. And one thing they did is they approached the parents of the kid who had a baby across the street. Said, are you willing to give up that baby to a Christian family to put in safekeeper? If the parents said yes, then it were mostly students that found home for those kids. And in that way, they saved about 600 kids. They also smuggled out people, adults, if they could. And it is strictly a guess, but the guess is that they saved 600 kids and 600 adults that way. Now they had to, when the people were transported from the theater to the camp, there was a count. And so the mothers of the kids that were put into safety, they had bundles in their arms with blankets in it. And also all the counting of the people that left the room was done by the Jewish people. And so if they knew that they had smuggled 10 out, he counted 67, 68, 69, 80, 81, 82. And they did that very fast, and they were never caught. So my brother, on the one hand, he went along with the SS to pick up his fellow Jews. On the other hand, he helped some to safety. How that balances out, I leave up to you to decide. My mother didn't give him much chance. He said, you have to do that to buy us some time. So he really didn't have the choice. We had two, really, because we had left our home several times when there were razzias, as they were called, raids. And there were two real close encounters. This is where we lived at the time in the Clio Street. And one day they had the razzia of the Clio Street. And they tried a new thing. They just went door to door to see whether they could find some Jews. And we lived in the middle of the block, and I was standing behind the curtain here and saw the SS men coming closer and closer. And finally, the SS men stood here and rang the bell, and I was behind the curtains. They were heavier curtains than they were when we visited in 1993. So I could see him, he couldn't see me, and it was for me as looking death into its face. And then I remembered my mother, run. And my mother was home. And that's the only time that I actually made the decision. I ran to my mother, I grabbed her hand, and we went out the back door, across and into an apartment over here of people that we knew. Fortunately, their back door was open and we managed to slip in. Not more than 30 seconds later, the SS men appeared on our neighboring porch and entered our apartment. 30 seconds later, I wouldn't be here. So that was one close escape. Another close escape was my brother knew that there was a huge raid coming, and he suggested that we come to his office, that they probably wouldn't leave that alone. So it was basically an apartment, but it was converted to an office. And we were not the only ones that looked for shelter there. And the Nazis did come. And that's when a couple of buddies of my brother took me upstairs and put a chair on a table, and there was a trapdoor. And I opened the trapdoor to the attic and disappeared in the attic and closed the trapdoor and got the scare of my life, and the trapdoor opened, but fortunately only another kid came up to join me up there. And I was sweating it out up there. The attic basically didn't have any floor. It had joists, the floor joist, and then the glass and plaster ceiling below. And nature called. I had to go. And I didn't want to lose my life because of a yellow stain in the ceiling. And I found a bottle. And maybe it's still up there, vintage of 1943. I don't know, but I was very, very happy to find that bottle. In the meantime, I was sweating it out up there because I had no idea what was happening down below. Would I still find my mother and my brother when I came down from there? If they were gone, what would I do? Should I try to join them? Because I knew where they would be taken. And I knew that my mother would be absolutely furious if I did that. Fortunately, when I came down, they were both still there. What happened down below is that the Nazis took everybody in the building in a large room and put them all on one side. And then they had the list of the people that were supposed to work there and called their names. Now, my brother had an armband that identified him as being from the Jewish Council, and he managed to slip out. So there was only one Angress left in the room. And when they called up the name Angress, my mother slipped across. So you had to be fast on your feet. And that's how we survived that one. Then, late 1943, in September 1943, my brother came home one of the days. And since he was working closely with the SS, he usually knew what was going on. And he said, you know, until further notice in our stamp has come to an end. Tonight they are going to pick up the remaining, at that point, out of the 108,000 Jews, 140,000 Jews living in Holland, there were only 2,000 or so left in Amsterdam, if not less. And he said, tonight they're going to come for us. And my mother was thankfully prepared for that. She called a taxi. How she managed that is beyond me, because there was very little gas available. If there were 3 taxis in Amsterdam, that would surprise me. But anyhow, she managed to get a taxi, and I packed another set of clothes and some toiletries, and that was it. And my brother and my mother had the same. And we went to a place I had no idea who it was, It was a German lady who ran a sweatshop. We went into a room with full of sewing machines and bags of fur, where in daytime there were women sewing, making caps and gloves out of fur for the soldiers on the Eastern Front. The woman told me, and I have no idea who she was. She must have been some kind of a relationship to my father somewhere along the line. She wrote, you have to be absolutely quiet. She gave us a potty and a bottle of water because that night her boyfriend was going to visit her, and guess what? He was a Nazi. So we bedded down on the bags with fur and spent the first night in that room. The next morning we left, and we left to 3 different destinations. I didn't know that at the time, but the Dutch resistance movement has sort of taken charge of us at that point. So there was a place for my mother to go, the place for my brother to go, the place for me to go. It was deemed much safer to break families up. I mean, you have seen what happened with the Frank family, where they got 8 people in one fell swoop. They did what they could. I don't fault them for that. But the logic is there to break people up as much as possible. I went actually to another German woman. Again, that one I knew. She was a former associate of my father somehow. And she lived in a boarding house and lived in a studio apartment there. The boarding house was run by 2 very Christian, religious women, and I felt very safe there, but a boarding house is not exactly the best place for somebody to be in hiding. Also, you know, by that time I was 15 years old, and to share a room with a lady, it would have been difficult. And so the Dutch, but I was told they were looking for a permanent place for me. And this is where I spent a year and a half. I mean, they found a family, Alida and Ton Kui. I will show them to you in a minute. And this is where I spent a year and a half in hiding. This was the entrance door down below. You can see, I mean, there was steps, there was no elevator there. I have a hunch that all the people knew that I was a Jewish kid there. Also, I had gotten a whole new identity. Instead of Hans Angress, I was Hans Andreas. They took my ID, took the J out of it, changed a couple of letters, changed my birthplace from Berlin to Rotterdam, because in Rotterdam, when the Germans invaded Holland, they bombed the whole center part of Rotterdam and destroyed all the records. So a lot of people in hiding had Rotterdam addresses that didn't exist anymore. And so in a way I was legitimized, but I couldn't go to school because in Dutch I have as much of an accent as I do in English. And so my Rotterdam birthplace, and that just wouldn't have worked. So I spent a lot of time reading, and for a while I had a tutor. And for me, the time in hiding was actually a real high, because the Khois were heavily involved in the Dutch resistance movement. They helped people, hundreds of people, getting food coupons, and for people in hiding, Jews as well as non-Jews, and sometimes actually food. And so there was a lot of activity going in and out of the house. And once a month, for instance, the Dutch resistance movement had to get a hold of enough coupons to supply as many people in hiding with food coupons. If you didn't have the coupons, you had to buy your food on the black market. And for instance, to give you an idea, if a pound of butter was $2, on the black market it was $20. The same with all other food items except perishables like vegetables and fruit. So we got the whole stacks of coupons, and they had to be cut apart and pasted by, there were not only food, but also clothing coupons, and they had and I was allowed to help them with that, so in a way, I felt part of the resistance movement. This is a photo at the time of Ton Kui, and his brother was a fireman, and he got injured, but he had kept his uniform, and he gave his uniform to Ton, and that gave him an awful lot of freedom, because especially during the last few years of the war, there was a curfew. Nobody was allowed on the street between 8 at night and 6 in the morning. But if you had a fireman uniform, that allowed you to be out any time, because fires don't happen also between 8 and 6. So, and he was never stopped. And the Nazis also have a healthy respect for uniforms. So it gave him an awful lot of freedom. And here's another photo that is much later. The family, after the war, I helped them get to the United States. And this is a photo of Ton and Ali in Danville, here in California. And they came over, I think, in 1953. While I was in hiding there, they had a small apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, and they had 2 kids, 4 and 6 years old. And the 2 kids, had one narrow, long room, and there was only room for 2 beds in there. So those 2 boys had to sleep in one bed for those year and a half, while I had the other bed. And those 2 boys, by the way, were told exactly what was happening, that I was a Jewish kid, that they could not talk about it, that if they did, that it cost all of them their lives, that they could not visit after school any of their schoolmates, nor could they have any schoolmates coming over to us. And to put that pressure on those 4 and 6 years old kids especially on the younger one, it took a toll. They came, and as I say, they came over to this country. Actually, they did very well. The older one, Peter, became a history professor. He taught history. His younger brother became a nuclear physicist. And while their parents were here, initially they worked for me. I was a dairyman for 20 years. They worked on the dairy and they had a baby there, Sonia, and she is a nurse in Chico. And I'm still in touch with them. Come on. Yeah. While I was in hiding, Amsterdam was on the flight path from England to Berlin. And at times there came, usually when they made it, the Americans flew in daytime, the Brits at night. Of course, the Brits I couldn't see, but the Amis I could, as we called them at the time. And so it was very exciting to see these. They usually came in waves of about 100 planes, and then there was a period in between, and then another 100. And occasionally one of them got hit. And one day I was home alone, and one plane, obviously the props weren't running, so it came gliding towards me. And I was thinking for a moment, what am I going to do now? I said, if I move, it may crash there, so I might as well stay here and watch what's happening. And fortunately, it veered off and crashed in a street, and fortunately, it only killed one vendor on the street. In the meantime, the crew had bailed out, and it was sickening to see the Nazis shoot at their parachutes. And you could see that they made holes in them, but I was later on told that all of them make it to the ground, that half of them were caught by the Nazis, but the other half, the Dutch underground, got to them first, and they had ways of getting them back to England to fly again. That was one of the other things the Dutch resistance movement did. So that, Anne Frank in her book said that she was terribly scared of the planes overhead. For me, it was music to my ears, because that was my only chance, ultimately, for those guys to be successful. And my mother, in the meantime, I told you she was a tough lady. She was in hiding. This was a boarding house where we first lived when we came to Holland. And she was living in one of these, I don't know which one, attic rooms, and masqueraded. By the way, the boarding house was taken over by German military officers. And she was a maid. She cleaned their room and made their beds. And she also managed to get her fingernails done and her hair done once a week. My mother had her priorities. This one, yeah, you can't see it very well. The last winter in Holland, in Amsterdam, it was a really cold winter, the winter of 44, 45. There was no electricity because the Dutch, the Allied had made it in the fall of 44 to the River Rhine. But then they were stopped. Some of you might have seen the movie Bridge Too Far. They were trying to get into the north, but the government in England asked the Dutch railroad companies to go on strike, which they did. But that resulted in extreme scarcities in the northern part of Holland. And so we had no gas, no electricity, and basically no fuel. I mean, people cut down trees, tore down houses. And so this is it's a gallon can, and inside the gallon can is a quart can. And you build a fire, and you set the whole thing on a wood stove. And you build a fire in the wood stove, and then the heat from the wood stove hits the bottom of the pot, and then the draught was down into the stove and up the pipe. And that's how we cooked. And you only cooked it for a short period of time, and then you had straw containers where you put it basically in your bed and let it simmer from then on. Because you really had so little fuel to do anything with. The war in Holland, in northern part of Amsterdam, just came to an end all of a sudden in 1945. The Germans were still there, the war was over. It was a confusing situation. And then about 3 or 4 days after the end of the war, we heard that the Canadians were going to come. And I wanted to see them come into the city in a way to have some kind of a closure. And so I went there, and of course there were thousands of others. We were told where they would be coming. And we were waiting and waiting, and finally I saw something coming from the distance. And as it came closer, the first thing that I saw was a tall, good-looking black dude on a Harley Davidson with the biggest smile on his face that you can imagine. And to this day, this dude is still my symbol of freedom. I mean, that was the end of the war for me. And behind them, there were miles and miles of supplied trucks. And a few days later, this guy showed up, my oldest brother. We didn't know that he had joined the army. Not only did he join the army, he, a few days before D-Day, the 82nd Airborne Division asked for volunteers. He was trained at Camp Ritchie. He was one of the Ritchie boys. He was trained as an interrogator for prisoners of war. So when they asked for volunteers, he volunteered. So his first jump was on D-Day. The pilot was a chicken pilot and dropped them way off base, and so he was captured by the Nazis. Fortunately, he was brought to Cherbourg and liberated 8 days later by the Americans, and then the rest of the time he did his job as interrogator of prisoners of war. And so when the war was over, he asked his commanding general, I would like to go look for my family, and he gave him a unlimited pass to look for his family and gave him a jeep. And one other guy who also had family in Holland came with him. So he showed up on Mother's Day 1945. And that's how we got reunited. Yes, and this is my father. He did not return. And we were told that he probably has perished in Auschwitz. But we really did not know anything in any specifics. And in 1997, I got a letter from the Red Cross and that was after the Berlin Wall had come down and Germany was reunited. And when they found the millions of documents that Bud Aronson, and so that's where the Red Cross seems to have gotten its information. And on the death notices, I got a date finally, 19th of January, 1943, and the cause of death was sudden heart stoppage. And I always found that language somewhat strange. Why didn't they say heart attack like they did with so many others? But okay, I accepted that. Then my brother actually managed, he was a historian, and so he managed to get a copy of the actual document that the Nazis had made. And it was signed by a Dr. Bruno Kidd. And time of death, 2:00 a.m. on January 19. And again, it said sudden heart stoppage. And in preparation for today, I decided to Google Dr. Kidd. And I found out that Dr. Kidd's job was in Auschwitz to select, when people, I have to explain, when people, Auschwitz was not strictly an extermination camp, but also slave labors. So when people arrived in Auschwitz, some of them went straight into the gas chambers, and others went into the barracks for slave labors. Now I knew that my father, from the records, was 20 days in Auschwitz, so I knew that he wasn't shunted into the gas chambers right away. The way they did that was by with a syringe and a few cc of phenol shot directly into the heart, which stopped the heart immediately. Hey, all of a sudden the death certificate made sense. The only feeling that I have is that it probably was an easier death for my father than having to gasp for 15 minutes for air in a gas chamber. By the way, this method of killing people was developed much earlier and was mostly applied to people who were disabled either mentally or physical, because they were considered to be a burden on the finances of Nazi Germany. So tens of thousands of people from 1939 to 41 were killed that way. And the Nazis had a name for that, abspritzen, to squirt people off. The churches ultimately brought that stop to a halt, at least mostly. It seemed to have continued whenever they felt they could get by with it. So all I can say is be careful what you Google. I could have done with a little less specifics. Now that the war was over, I found myself on my own at age 17. My mother was not in a position to support me, and my father didn't return. So basically, I was on my own. I managed to get a job in a cracker factory and as a bookkeeper. But my brother, Tom, who, because he was a GI, offered us help to get to the United States, and both my brother and I decided to jump at that opportunity. Let me just jump one, I forgot. I also found out as far as Dr. Bruno Kitt is concerned, I want to finish that one up. He was tried in Hamburg by the tribunal, not for the crimes that he committed in Auschwitz, but after Auschwitz closed, when the Russians were there, he was transferred to Neuengamme, also a concentration camp, and he was there only for 8 weeks. And he seems to have committed enough crimes there that he was actually sentenced to death for the crimes that he had committed in Neuengamme. And my brother also managed to get the entire transcript of his trial. I think it's close to 100 pages. And in this transcript is a letter from his mother, for instance, from his wife. What a wonderful guy Dr. Kitt is. From the priest who married him. He got married, Bruno Kitt got married to Claire Kitt in 1945. In 1946, he had a 1-year-old baby. So, and there were lots of letters from lots of people. What a wonderful man Dr. Kitt was. And quite frankly, in his private life, he may have been. I mean, that is a big question. His day job was to select people to be killed. When he got home, he might have been a completely different person. Who knows? I mean, that's, I think, what people need to understand. And I can only wonder what this young man, this 1-year-old kid, who was born in 1946, how he handled his life. As a matter of fact, the other day I talked to some kids, and after I talked to them, one girl came up to me and said, you know, it's interesting to hear the other side. I said, what other side? She said, my grandparents were Nazis and my parents are neo-Nazis. She was not living at home anymore. I mean, it just blew my mind. So, to get back to where I left off, came to the United States, $25 in my pocket. I first went to a school that a friend of my brother ran, and for 4 months I managed to get a high school diploma with a bit of faking. And for some reason I wanted to be a dairyman. So I took a job on a dairy in Connecticut. And then I got an opportunity to I knew that somebody was looking for somebody to help on the dairy in Tomales Bay here in Marin County. And so I decided to come west. And the place is now known as the Strauss family farm. I was 20 years partner there. After that, I became a real estate broker, and I didn't like sales very much, so later on I went into property management, mostly HUD subsidized housing. I've been married twice. I have 6 children from my first marriage, 12 grandkids and 6 great-grandkids. I am often asked why I do not seem angry. The answer is that I was angry at first about what happened to me growing up, but I was also numb. Caring mainly for cows for 20 years allowed me not to have to deal with my anger. Ultimately, with prodding from my second wife, Enola, I got counseling and realized that anger was a waste of time and energy, and instead that I should funnel my energy into constructive things. And speaking to students like you certainly is helping me, because I hope by sharing my story with you that I can urge young people to choose a positive path in life and to learn to be tolerant and try to solve the world's problem in a peaceful way rather than with guns. So what might you learn from a Jewish kid who grew up in Nazi Germany? The inhumanity of people towards each other continues on and on. The Nazis just put a new twist to it. When evil people come to power, apparently it is very easy for them to convince perfectly decent people to do very nasty stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, intelligent evil people in leading positions are a lot more dangerous than unintelligent ones. When finding oneself a target of persecution, please find a way to protect yourself. Unfortunately, the majority of Jewish people, at least in Holland, that's the only place where I can judge it, way too late to realize what was really happening. And I'm really enormously fortunate that I had a mother who was a realist. Realize that few people are heroes, willing to risk their life to save others. Ask yourself what would you do if a complete stranger facing an unknown danger would ask for your help? Would you risk your and your family's life as Ali and Ton did to shelter me from the Nazis? And don't take democracy for granted, it is fragile. Remember, Hitler was elected. Shortly after that, he declared a state of emergency, but that was never lifted. And that gave him his unlimited power. And please exercise your right to vote. I'm hopeful for the future, but there's work to be done. And I'm afraid that much of it is up to you, because our generation has failed to deal with the many long-term problems facing humankind. Above all, pay attention and not just follow the leader as so many Germans did, and treat others the way you want to be treated. I wish you guys strength, good luck, and the best in the world. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Ready to answer some questions
Yeah.
if they exist?
Yeah.
Well,
So, during the whole time, your father was the only one who actually died during the war, or during the Holocaust?
Well, for my immediate family,
Okay.
but there were more from the extended family. I mean, uncles and aunts, and actually, uncles and aunts, but most of my nephews and nieces managed to get out of Germany.
the question was whether Hans's father was the only one in his immediate family who died. And Hans, you heard respond that there were aunts and uncles and cousins who also perished.
You said that you and your mother and brother had split up, in hiding. How did you find each other afterwards besides the revolution?
Well, because we had agreed to go to the last place we lived, and in the hope that those people, they were very accommodating. So we found each other immediately. And besides, also there were people in the Dutch underground who knew where all three of us were. But we didn't know, and I didn't want to know. Because if I would be caught, and I know the Nazis used torture. And so a lot of stuff that I also did for the Dutch, help in the Dutch underground. For instance, I delivered coupons at times, and I was never to know the address or to get there. When I was in hiding in a neighborhood that I didn't know, and when I delivered stuff, they told me, don't look at street names and don't look at numbers. They told me exactly, you go up to that corner, then you turn left, you go past so many entrances, then you go to the top and you go to the left door. Don't look at the number, don't look at the street name. And I didn't, because I didn't know how much torture I could stand. Yeah.
You had said that your family went to London in 1937 on a visitor's pass. Was it difficult to get the visitor's pass, and how long did you stay there?
We stayed there for 4 months. And we could have stayed in England, but we would have been interned. In retrospect, that would have been the better way to go. My father basically made all the right decisions until the end. Because we had 24-hour notice when he was arrested. Because they came the day before he wasn't home. They said they would be the next day. And actually, the guys that came to arrest were surprised that he was there. My mother begged my father to go into hiding, which we could have done at the time. And he said, no, I'm the one that committed the crime, and I should pay the price. And my mother was absolutely fuming at him. He said, you leave me alone with those 2 kids? I mean,
She was tough.
thanks goodness, she was tough.
Yeah.
So, in response to that, I'm Hans's daughter. But I remember
What's your name?
my name is Madeline Hodges, and I'm Hans's daughter. And I remember my father telling me as a child about this, that my grandfather thought that he and his life would be safer if he listened, and he went. But that's what I remember at one point.
Yeah, no, well, he did not foresee what my mother, what would happen.
I understand that part, yeah. I just remember when I asked you that question as a child, your answer was he was doing what he thought was best for the
Yeah,
family.
but you were much younger than you are now.
Yes, that's
And hindsight is 2020. I saw another hand. Yes.
When you've looked around for the last several years and seen civil liberties and preparations for taking people away, I don't know if you're aware and attentive to those FEMA camps and many at the NDA, National Defense Authorization. I mean, just one after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. What your response is to the climate here.
Well, I'm worried about what's going on. And quite frankly, I expect some revolt. I didn't expect it so soon. And my feeling is that's premature. Things have to get a little bit worse before people really get concerned. But, you know, that's strictly my feeling. But yes, I'm following it. And I am glad that I'm 84. These young people will have to deal with all this mess.
Yeah.
I'm going to bow out in a little while.
Not too soon.
No, I'll stick around for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hans, did your mother ever end up coming to the States, or did she stay in Holland?
No, she didn't stay in Holland. She didn't want to be a burden on her kids. And so she remarried in England. It was sort of a marriage of convenience, but it worked out reasonably well for both of them. And her husband died after a few years, and then she had a stroke, and my oldest brother and I went over, picked her up and brought her to the United States. So she died in Petaluma at the age of 92. The last few years after her stroke were not very pleasant for her. But at least, you know, she was near.
I hope you'll join me in thanking Hans very much for sharing his story with us and giving us his words of wisdom. Thank you, Hans.